Okay, welcome back to the International Relations and Cooperation course. This is part two of the mini lecture on war. And in this part of the lecture, the objective is to look at the underlying causes of war. And especially, we're going to compare the different underlying causes of international military conflict using the different levels of analysis, the individual, state, and international levels. Starting with the causes of war and especially the role of individuals, people, especially leaders, decide if a country goes to war. They don't always make these choices logically, and here are some of the reasons why. So there's mistakes in understanding, or thinking the same, or groupthink. We'll talk about that. And being over optimistic, and also about gender differences. So, in terms of mistakes in understanding, sometimes leaders see things wrong or can't handle stress, and this bad judgment can lead to war. For example, US leaders wrongly believed Iraq had dangerous weapons and that invading the country would be easy. And again, this was a misjudgment, misperception. Thinking the same, when everyone in a group agrees without questioning, they might make bad decisions, and this is called groupthink. And this happened with the U.S. when they were planning to invade Cuba in 1961. This was known as the Bay of Pigs. So nobody on the U.S. side, among the leaders and the advisors, nobody wanted to disagree. And so they saw things only one way, and eventually that plan failed. And then being over optimistic, leaders often think they can win wars quickly. Their confidence might make them take big risks. An example is when Pakistan used force against India in 1999 because they felt powerful with their new nuclear weapons. That they were over optimistic. And then gender differences. Studies have shown that men might be more confident they'll win in conflicts, and also that may start wars more often. They might be more prone or lean towards war more quickly than women. Also, countries where women are treated better tend to be more peaceful with other nations. So, all these points show that individual choices and mistakes really matter in decisions that lead to war. So, looking at the causes of war and the role of the state, so at the state level of analysis, we see two primary factors that influence a nation's inclination toward peace or inclination toward war. So that, or leaning toward peace or leaning toward war. So there are economic systems and also political institutions. So, in terms of domestic economic systems and war, so we notice that in economic a country's economic system can impact its likelihood to engage in war. So, from a Marxist theory perspective, capitalist economies might be more prone to conflict due to their inherent nature of underpaying workers and competing for colonies. So, as per Lenin's interpretation of the causes of World War One, that was his explanation. However, some scholars suggest the opposite, that capitalist countries prefer peace due to their desire for open trade and economic prosperity through collaboration rather than conquest. Moving on to the domestic political institutions and governmental processes. So next, we look at the democratic peace thesis. So, this concept within the liberal tradition proposes that democracies are less likely to engage in war with one another. And two possible reasons described are the institutional constraints and normative constraints. The institutional constraints, these are the checks within a country's system that prevent leaders from unilaterally or going it alone in declaring war. So partly because citizens who bear the costs of war have the power to elect and thereby control their leaders. And the next ones are normative constraints. These refer to the personal values and attitudes and beliefs of leaders. So this has a suggestion that democratic leaders are more likely to value compromise and peace, whereas authoritarian leaders may use force and conflict for personal gain and power. So the potential risk of military conflict undermining democratic institutions was highlighted in Eisenhower's 1961 warning against the undue influence of the military-industrial complex and the rise of becoming a garrison state where life is heavily militarized. So luckily the U.S., with its checks and balances and skepticisms about government, has avoided this fate to some extent, although we see the military-industrial complexes having a huge power. So finally, the democratic, while the democratic peace thesis, has some valid points, it's not absolute. Democracies often engage in conflicts with non-democracies. There's no consensus on why the democratic peace occurs. And even within democracies, misinterpretations or manipulations of policy can lead to war. So in conclusion, both the economic and political systems within a country significantly influence whether it seeks peaceful or militaristic resolutions in times of international conflict. So finally, moving to the international perspective, the first point we'd like to talk about is anarchy as a possible cause of war. So sometimes the lack of a world government called international anarchy can make countries feel like they have no one to turn to when problems arise. This situation can lead to war in two ways. It allows other problems or feelings to push countries toward war, and it can also actively push countries to do things that make war more likely. Without a global system keeping peace, countries sometimes end up in big disagreements, but not all disagreements lead to war. So we can't say anarchy alone causes war. The United Nations tries to help countries solve their problems peacefully, but it can't always protect countries or punish those that start violence. So leaders still worry about war, especially if they make mistakes and there's no one to stop them from escalating to fighting. And then the second point here, how anarchy can push for conflict. Anarchy can cause countries to hide their true plans and power. This makes it hard to solve problems without fighting. So for example, after losing a war, Iraq's leader tried to look strong, which caused the US and others to think he was a threat, and this led to another war. And also, without a world government, countries might not trust each other to keep promises made to prevent war. They might choose to fight now rather than risk being attacked later when they are weaker. And the last point I want to talk about is the prisoner's dilemma. And so imagine two criminals caught by the police, and each facing different possible punishments depending on whether they stay quiet or blame each other. So they can't talk to each other, and each one's decision affects both. This situation, called the prisoner's dilemma, shows why two groups might not cooperate, even when it's in their best interest. Looking at this image, we can see on the left axis we have A stays silent at the top or betrays B, defects. So cooperate or defects. And the top, horizontally, we have B stays silent or cooperates, or B betrays A or defects. So we can see the best possible answer for both of them, or in their best interest, would be both of them to cooperate. They both stay silent, and both of them would serve just 1 year. But A can't trust that B will cooperate. In this case, if A stays silent, they would serve 3 years and B would go free. Same thing for B. If B decides to stay silent and cooperate and A defects, then A goes free and B serves 3 years. So they end up both not trusting each other, and they both betray each other, and they both end up defecting, and they both serve 2 years. So that's all for this part of the lecture. There's one more part, and this will be talking about internal wars, and their causes. Look forward to seeing you back for the next part.